You are listening to the new WPVM FMLP in Asheville, North Carolina, 103.7 on your dial, and streaming globally at WPVMFM.org. This is Mark at The World According to Mark, and this morning I have as my guest Jennifer Bowman. That's a pretty familiar name around these parts. Jennifer, thank you for coming to the studio.
Thank you for having me.
So Jennifer is a reporter for the Asheville Citizen-Times. I will say she's a veteran reporter, but she's pretty young as a veteran, as veteran reporters go. But her name appears as a byline in lots of articles in the Citizen-Times, and she's not a native to these parts, so she's happy about the rainy weather we've been having the last couple of weeks. She's a California native, graduated magna cum from San Diego State University not too many years ago with a journalism degree. And before you got to these parts, you were a reporter in Battle Creek, Michigan, which most people associate with one or more cereals. I remember Fruit Loops. I had no idea whether that was part of that whole cereal conglomerate. But Jennifer, let me stop talking, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you came to the Citizen-Times, and then we'll talk about some of the stories you've been covering.
Yeah, I think you covered it pretty well, but yeah, I've been here since August. I came from a paper in Michigan that is also owned by Gannett, and I've been doing journalism for about 5 years, actually 6 years now, since coming out of college, and I'm covering Buncombe County government here.
So in Michigan, or I guess as a result of your reporting for Michigan, if I have this correct, you were named a Rising Star.
Yeah.
So don't be bashful about that. Tell us what that means.
So that's an award I got last year. That's a statewide award from the Michigan chapter of the Associated Press. And it basically is awarded each year to one person who has no less than 5 years journalism experience and shows, exemplary work for in journalism.
So it's a recognition of the quality, I guess, of your reporting. So I want to talk, before we get into particular storylines, basically, what do you do? The newspaper business has changed over the years. A lot of newspapers are not doing so well. There's been a huge sea change in terms of moving from print to electronic. The Citizen-Times straddles both, as I guess most successful newspapers do.
Sure.
But not as many people read newspapers, even though it's available on all kinds of media. But tell us, first of all, what was your passion that drove you to get into the journalism field to begin with?
Sure, yeah, so I started, actually when I was little, I thought I wanted to be some kind of writer. I thought I was going to write fiction books, and then I got older and I just realized that I didn't really have an interest in that. And I've done journalism in high school. I went to a brand new high school when I started in 9th grade, so I was part of the first ever newspaper we had there. And I actually I was sports editor, so I did a lot of sports writing. And then come college, I had an interest as I got older in hard news, in government actually, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I always liked newspapers. That was my first internship. I interned at the San Diego Union-Tribune in San Diego. And then I tried TV for a while, and I did 2 internships with NBC. I enjoyed it. I think I got a lot of good experience, but it really just kind of solidified where I wanted to go as far as newspapers. And keep in mind, when I was in college, the newspaper industry already was not doing quite well. So, I've had editors during my internships wondering why I want to go into journalism. It's not a job where you make a ton of money. It's not a job known for, especially in newspapers, it's not known to to be well in job stability, but here I am, and I really enjoy it, and I've really enjoyed some of the investigative work that I've done since I've gotten out of college.
So your decision to come to Asheville was motivated by what?
Well, Asheville, the paper within Gannett was kind of actually known to be a pretty good paper for its size. It was pretty innovative, had done a lot of things to change how beats were looked at. One that I think is a good example, and you know, Mackenzie Lunsford's still there now, is how she kind of looked at her food beat, which, you know, was more than just here are the restaurants opening and closing, which people are interested in, and certainly does well, and it's worth writing about. But she also talks about some of the challenges of being in the service industry and kind of seeing where, you know, our coverage areas really hit people. So I had an interest in Asheville. It's not a terrible place to live either. You know, it's a well-liked place. It's a popular place, and you know, and in all honesty, the paper in Battle Creek has shrunk and shrunk and shrunk, and I think I did really good work there, but I saw two of my editors leave at the time, and I kind of thought it was time to go, and I can't do that much snow anymore.
So you mentioned Gannett, and I guess we'll take a moment. The Citizens Journal is owned by a very large news organization, one of the largest in the country.
Sure.
And if you look at you know, the newspaper in print, it looks as if you've got a bifurcation of the local part, the Citizens Journal part, and you also have the Gannett part, which would be presumably common to a lot of other newspapers that are part of the Gannett organization. So tell us, you know, how did, I know you're not part of the corporate involvement, but how does the fact that the Citizens Journal is part of that organization affect, you think, the news reporting and what's covered and how it's covered?
I think in the same way that all corporate owned newspapers, we get hit by these network, like company-wide strategies. So that affects our personnel, and internally it probably affects us more than honestly the outside public really sees. I think there's the obvious effects of, you know, manpower and the change in that, but you know, probably a common misconception is that we're getting handed down what to report, and that's not the case at all. That's not my experience with the last two papers I've worked for that are both Gannett. We are largely self-directed. Our editorials are local, and you know, there's pros and cons, I think, to having a corporate owner, but there's been a real push company-wide with Gannett to kind of create our own network of news, and so not quite Associated Press, but you know, if there's a story, for example, I covered in Battle Creek in the area, we had a horrific mass shooting involving an Uber driver. We were able to provide local coverage for USA Today, which is also owned by Gannett, and so there's pros and cons to that. Billy Graham, for example, we were the lead paper for USA Today's coverage, and so it helps with resources in that way, even if it sometimes is impacting us too, where it's not the best.
So if I understand what you're saying, you are a resource to the larger Gannett organization for stories that have a local character or a local origin.
Sure.
But as far as the stories that you decide to cover on the local scene, those are dictated more by editorial policy of this newspaper, and you're part of that decision-making process.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would say that you know, our beat reporters are largely self-directed. We're not necessarily assigned stories by our editors, who are also in-house, who have tons of experience in Asheville, who, you know, are sometimes even locals of the area. It takes a little bit, you know, when I first started, I'm coming from out of state even, and so there's always input that I welcome with, here's what typically is done well, here's what really resonates with readers, here's what they've been interested in, here's some stories to follow that have been ongoing. But, you know, local government is local government, and sometimes you know what people are interested in, even if it is a different community. And you get a sense of that, and you know what's important. You know, I think the Wanda Greene investigation is an obvious one. You dig into that, and you dig into that when you're talking about taxpayer money.
So somebody didn't tell you to just follow Wanda Greene wherever she goes, whatever store she walked into with gift cards, or because
No.
you've done I would say a ton, that's an overstatement, of stories on Wanda Greene.
Yeah. We have tools that show how often and how many people are reading our stories, how long they read our stories, and there's no denying that there is a great interest in the Wanda Greene investigation. I would probably go as far as there are many people outraged by it. And, it's more than just, the sensational stuff of buying women's lingerie at Walmart and going to TJ Maxx during the day and all that. I mean, we're talking about potentially, although maybe it's not included in the investigation, millions of dollars of taxpayer money that may have been improperly or illegally spent. As a journalist, you dig into that, no problem.
So we're going to talk about that a bit, but before we get into that area in specific, let me again ask you to just help us understand a little bit. You're an investigative / beat reporter.
Yeah.
And what do you consider to be sort of your topical area? Buncombe County, Asheville, both?
Buncombe County government is my beat. We have 3 reporters, including myself, who cover government. So I cover county government. We have Joel Burgess, who covers city government. And then we have Mark Barrett, a longtime reporter who covers state and federal politics here in Asheville and North Carolina. And so often we try to fill in for each other if someone wants to pursue, say, an investigative story. But often these beats, you can do plenty of investigative work on your beat, and I think that kind of shows with some of the stuff that we've been doing lately.
So we're going to talk a little bit, if you would, about how you get your story, how you decide what to pursue. Anytime there's a movie, whether it's All the President's Men or The Post, there's a lot of drama, a lot of good background music, and then somebody calls up a deep throat and says, I have a tip for you. Have you gotten any of that?
Oh, sure. I mean, let me just say that those movies, while I love to watch them as a journalist, are far from, like, reality. I went to a conference, actually, 2 years ago now, where they had the real reporters from the Spotlight team after the movie had come out, and there was a lot of talk about how do you make a movie about something where I sit and go through records for hours exciting. So, Hollywood does a really good job at that. That's not quite what we're doing every day. It is a lot, it changes every day what we do, whether it's, I've talked to people who want to remain anonymous all the time. I get anonymous calls all the time. It's not quite, sitting in a parking garage in the dark with a shadowy figure. But not to say that doesn't happen, I think Joel is a good example. He's done a lot of the coverage of the...
Joel, what's his last?
Burgess. So he covers city government, and he broke the story about the beating of Johnny Rush, and that came from an anonymous person. And so, it changes every day how we do it. And it's probably a combination of everything, whether it's conversations with people who are anonymous or well-known, or on the record, off the record, on background, and public records requests, which are my favorite. So...
Well, while we're on this topic, and you mentioned anonymous tips, I want to ask you, how is that dealt with, again, from an editorial decision? Obviously, if somebody is calling and says, I'm willing to talk, but I'm not going to tell you who I am, or suppose they say it's off the record, which would be a strange thing to do.
Right.
I'm assuming, again, from all the movies I've seen, that there are some concerns about corroboration for an anonymous tipster.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how that's approached at Citizens Journal?
Yeah,
Citizens Times.
I think it varies among companies, but I would say that often we veer on the side of being incredibly careful on whether we use anonymous sources in print. For example, the Wanda Greene stuff I've never used on the record. I've never attributed anything to an anonymous source. I may have gotten something from an anonymous source, and I have found my way to attribute to a document, or to a record, or to someone who's willing to say it on the record. So there's a lot of talk about, with editors on that, you can't just put anonymous sources in the paper without, having a very long and well thought talk with the people who make those decisions.
And what you seem to be saying, if I am following you correctly, is if you get an anonymous source, that's fine from the standpoint of the impetus or initiation of the story.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But then you're not you're not going to settle for that,
Yeah.
particularly if it's a new anonymous source. Maybe you have several folks that call in that you recognize from time to time.
Sure.
But then you follow it up to see, okay, well, they said such and such, but how can I substantiate that with a physical record or somebody else who is willing to go on and give his or her name?
Exactly. I have never in print attributed anything to an anonymous source because it's such a rigorous standard for editors. And you usually can't just attribute to one anonymous source. You got to get multiple, and they have to be credible, and it's really well thought out.
Let me just advise our listeners that you're listening to WPVM FM in Asheville, North Carolina, 103.7 on your dial, streaming globally at WPVMFM.org. And we have Jennifer Bowman, a reporter from the Asheville Citizen-Times, with us today to talk about what she does, what she covers, and go into some of the stories that that she has covered in the months, years. Was Wanda Greene your first? Was that sort of your first big story?
Maybe not. In Battle Creek, I covered again, just like Wanda, a well-known figure who worked for a public agency and headed that agency for over 20 years. And he's in prison now for stealing. He embezzled Medicaid money and paid a psychic in Key West, Florida. So that kind of had the same kind of effect as far as someone who was well-liked, well-respected, and had these allegations brought against him.
He embezzled money and paid a psychic, and the psychic didn't tell him that was a
yeah,
crime.
that was a common joke. Yeah, the psychic didn't tell you he saw it coming, but yeah, he's still in prison right now.
Okay, but when you came to Asheville, how long after you were here and working at Citizen Times did the investigation get announced in effect? And it wasn't really, I guess, so much announced as it came out.
10 days.
Okay.
So I started, and I was already kind of trying to familiarize myself with the beat, meet people, show my face, and then the story broke. So it's kind of consumed almost my entire time here. So.
Right, because there's a constant flow of information, even though the investigation itself obviously was a confidential investigation, and even after it was announced that the FBI was involved and who the target of the investigation, or at least one of the targets of the investigation, there wasn't a lot of official information.
No, there wasn't. There was actually probably for close to 2 months we had no idea of anything, at least on the record of what they were looking at. And so it took a lot of what journalists probably call fishing of public records requests and just seeing what hit, and I think we continue to do that, actually, to be quite honest. Even with an indictment on the table, there's still a lot of fishing and a lot of information I think we've yet to really find and uncover.
So you really hadn't had an opportunity to get really an understanding of the politics of Buncombe County through the commissioners and all that before the story broke.
No, it's been from everything from, because I came out of state, public records laws vary greatly from state to state. So not only was I getting used to what could I get, what could I not get, and who's this person and who's this person. It's, and I continue. 6 months is not enough time to, actually it's been closer to 8 months now. It's not a long enough time to really feel like an expert on my beat. So I've been kind of learning as I cover this.
But as part of your sort of beat coverage, you presumably attend regularly the board meetings for the commissioners. Maybe there's other meetings that you attend on some kind of a regular basis. Mm-hmm. And you did that then, you're still doing it now. It's just part of how you keep current in what's going on.
Yeah, I think if I were at a bigger paper and we had plenty of people, we could have someone who could just dig in specifically into the investigation, into the allegations, and then someone might be able to cover the bi-weekly meetings. I do both.
But again, and I can see your point on that, in a way, knowing how the institution, so to speak, of government, Buncombe County Commission, the various committees, folks that report up to them, it gives you a sort of a more fulsome understanding of how it works and some perspective, because I think, again, we're going to start talking about it, but the story about Wanda Greene is not just a story about Wanda Greene.
No.
It's a story about what happened during her career, how she operated, how other people operated, who might have had different feelings, and so on and so forth. And I do want to get into that. But without having sort of the wider perspective, you perhaps would have only narrowly focused on Wanda Greene herself.
Yeah, I think that was another thing that was a learning process for me, was getting a sense of how things were approved through the board. Public meetings can be quite boring, although they do have their interesting characters and all that, but you see very important things, if done right, if done properly. Many things have to go through the Board of Commissioners, and the Wanda Greene investigation has gone beyond to addressing policies and really regular practices by the commissioners, and you're really seeing that at the board meetings. You wouldn't see it otherwise.
So maybe we should go back a little bit chronologically. After the story, and what was the story? The FBI, a spokesperson, was willing to go on record and saying, yes, there is an investigation.
Yeah, the U.S. Attorney's Office confirmed that she and others, which was the vocab used, were under investigation.
Unnamed others.
Yes.
So at that point, and anything else about the substance of it?
Nope.
Okay.
That's it.
So from that point, gathering information then becomes challenging, because there's only so much more, if anything, that you're going to hear directly from the U.S. Attorney's Office, because they're conducting a confidential investigation. There's a grand jury, and they're not going to let that information out of the bag.
Yeah, I mean, you can go, okay, so what would the feds be involved for, and kind of make your assumptions there. The way we kind of went about it was going and having conversations with people, even off the record, even anonymously, just to gather, what had been going on, what exactly was her tenure like. Because again, I had never met Wanda. I had never seen her actually until she was arraigned,
And
earlier this month.
you've never met her to this day,
No.
formally. You've seen
No.
her.
Yeah, I didn't go up and introduce myself, I guess, at the arraignment, but so it was a lot of just wondering, okay, what can we get in preparation of anything? When the U.S. Attorney's Office is saying that there's an investigation, you're already way behind. It's very unlikely that you're going to get ahead of investigators. And so, you have to be realistic about that. But, again, it's a lot of the fishing for records and just seeing what comes out.
So what did you look for first? And a sort of two-part question. What did you look for, and did you immediately think that one of the things you needed to do was to get access to the commissioners, those serving presently and those who were not serving presently but were serving at various time portions? Because Wanda Greene had over a 20-year career as county manager.
Yeah. I think even to this day, the commissioners aren't very vocal about the investigation, and understandably so. I mean, the feds say that the investigation's ongoing, and so their stance is we don't want to compromise anything. You can't quite do that under public records law when I ask for certain documents, so that's really where we've gotten ahead. And so it was kind of a matter of figuring out what public records do we ask for, and we just kind of thought, okay, let's gather how much federal funding. If the feds are involved, let's think about that. Where does the funding come from? How much does Buncombe County get? And what were some of these noteworthy federally funded projects that the county has done? And I don't know if that's paid off yet. That hasn't really come up, but it's something that we've gathered as far as our information goes. And then it was a lot of conversations, without giving away any kind of sourcing, but that helped us kind of figure out what exactly we needed to ask for, whether it was based on kind of rumors floating around or what, and that's how we got there. And early on, we run into, denials of public records requests because of the ongoing investigation. And that's something we've kind of gone back and forth with the county about.
So we're going to talk about the public records request and that whole process, but I want to key in on something. When you did attempt, and you have tried and probably been successful in part in talking to some county commissioners, were these, by and large, are they represented by their own personal attorney? Did they say, I can't talk to you, you need to talk to my attorney, or you need to talk to a county attorney? How have they handled it? And again, the question in the vernacular of the day is, has anybody lawyered up, which would be an indication, not of guilt, but an indication that they may be potentially themselves, if not a target, a potential subject of the ongoing investigation.
I don't know of any commissioners who have lawyered up, former or current. At least when I've spoken to the former commissioners, they've spoken to me, and you know they've you know, David Gant is a perfect example of this. Has talked about not wanting to compromise the investigation, and so not commenting on the investigation itself. But he is also a lawyer.
And David Gant
is the former chairman of a long time. I mean, basically his tenure kind of coincides with Wanda Greene's. Got on the board at the same time she became. He actually voted when she became county manager. He was on that board back in '97, and then left only months before Wanda Greene did. And so, certainly one of those names that have really come up throughout all of this, as you see, you know, these allegations span over a decade, and he's been the chairman for a long time. The commissioners have, I think, been selective of when they have chosen to speak. As far as county communications go, it's been largely, if not entirely, from their county attorney, Michael Frew. He's kind of handled all public records requests, kind of all questions I've had. Even if, you know, I'm not necessarily emailing him, I might get an email back from him, you know, and so I don't think they're messing around when it comes to an investigation, and I think they have been very careful about what they've said on the record. So
I mean, we had two commissioners here early on, Ellen Frost being one of them, and they made, I think, statements to the newspaper as well, at least on certain aspects of the allegations, even prior to the indictments, suggesting that, you know, they weren't necessarily in the loop, they didn't agree with everything, but they did comment on the sort of politics of how things were done, and how, in effect, stated correctly, Wanda Greene was able to do a lot of the things that she did without their being knowledgeable about it. I thought that was interesting that they were willing to make those statements on
I do think they've been open about that. And that was something that you know, as I was learning the process and the policies for the county, that stuck out for me with my experience in local government. One example is that they didn't receive a line item budget, a detailed budget, before they actually voted on it. That to me is a huge red flag. I've never seen that in my experience in my internships and at my old paper, where it was a much smaller commission with, you know, frankly, more structured policies than what I've seen in Buncombe County. And so there was a lot of talk, and we've reported on that, more so kind of her personality and her leadership style, and how she changed policies in a way that, you know, commissioners would argue has lessened their oversight and their ability to kind of monitor these things that have come up now.
So, you know, whether that plays out or how that plays out is not clear. I do want to talk about the public record request.
Sure.
What you're talking about there, and let me just pause for a moment again and tell our listeners you're listening to WPVM LP in Asheville, North Carolina, 103.7 on your dial, globally at WPVMFM.org. This is The World According to Mark, and we have Jennifer Bowman, a reporter with the Asheville Citizen-Times, with us. And we're talking about what she does, how she gets her stories, and we're going to talk a little more specifically about what she's learned from her coverage of all things associated with Wanda Greene and the criminal matter, which surfaced months ago and now has brought forth the U.S. attorneys brought forth an indictment against her and her son. But a records request is what you use, or what any citizen can use. It's not just relegated to the newspaper. When they want information that they believe exists, and it's on some computer or in some file with city, county government, whatever you're looking for. So tell us how that process works. How do you first identify that there is something? Who do you talk to? What do you have to fill out? How long do you have to wait? What kind of resistance do you get? If you get something back, is it redacted so it's not very usable? Tell us about that process.
Yeah, it can sometimes be quite a lengthy process. Again, it probably starts usually from talks with people about what documents may exist or how exactly these things are gathered or stored by local governments, and then there's some stuff that is standard. Wanda Greene's contract, for example, things that exist, that you want to get your hands on. And that is almost entirely how we've done our coverage of the Wanda Greene investigation, because people are so clamped down on talking about it. This was kind of the only way to go about it, and it hasn't always been easy. And that's, again, something I've had to kind of learn coming to North Carolina. It is quite different from Michigan's, they call it the Freedom of Information Act law there, but it's basically to get requests that are public. North Carolina, their language for public records laws is they have to respond to your request in as reasonable of a time as possible. That has no time limit. I'm not used to that. In Michigan, it was you have 5 business days to get back to me and either give me the records or let me know you need more time. And then those extensions are also regulated by time periods. And so there have been months that have gone by here in Asheville where I haven't gotten requests. And at the same time, the county also is, I'm sure, dealing with a whole nother flood of requests. They've seen a higher volume. But we've gotten pushback for some of our requests. Something that eventually we saw in records. We've asked for financial records for assistants who were named in a search warrant application that we got our hands on that showed an allegation of direct. Wanda Greene is accused of telling her assistants to buy gift cards. So we asked for the credit card records for those assistants. We at first were told you're not going to get them; they're part of an investigation. And so we wrote that.
And who tells you that?
Michael Fripp. Okay. So the county attorney is largely citing state law. There's certain things that you can withhold under public records law. I can't get everything. One example is North Carolina is extremely strict and extremely restricted on what personnel files I can get on public employees, which is completely different than Michigan, which I will say Michigan is not known as a beacon of its public records law, nor is North Carolina, but we're dealing with what we've got, right? And so we write that story. We write that the county won't give us these records, and at that point we're already questioning whether these were records.
So let me stop you for a second.
Sure.
You write that story in effect as a tactical decision to show the public that you're trying to be on top of this, but there are some obstacles to your getting what you need, and you let the public know that the county official or the county attorney is standing in your way, and what your hope and expectation is they'll read it and they'll say, well, maybe this doesn't look so good for us if we're trying to be transparent. Is that a sense of what you're saying?
That is certainly part of it. I think, especially in the early stages of this, we didn't have much on the record. I couldn't say, here's what she's under investigation for, so I narrowed it down by records denials. I asked for, so we got a series of denials. We were at first denied for gift card records. We were at first denied for the financial records. We are still being denied and still fighting the withholding of life insurance records. And so
what's that about? That's interesting.
I don't know. I've just been told that it's, when I asked for the life insurance records, I asked for payments made for life insurance policies for Wanda Greene. I was told I couldn't have them.
But let me ask you, from your vantage point, with the gift cards are, a major part of the indictment that was handed
Sure.
down. The life insurance, you must have some sense that there were life insurance policies on her life that were paid for by public monies, or what are you looking for?
I don't know. And again, that's a real good example of phishing. It's just, let me ask for life insurance records. You know, it's something that we've reported that they just won't give them to us. And I really don't know. I'm no expert on life insurance policy, so if I ever get the records, it'll take some research and homework on my part to understand. But it also helps us understand exactly what kind of life insurance policies are offered to county employees, and if that varies from if and when we get records from related to Wanda Greene, we can move forward there and see if there's a story. But
so, in a way, there's sort of a pairing that goes back and forth in terms of you
Yes.
ask, they refuse, you write a story, they reconsider, you go back, you don't just take the first no for an answer. Obviously there are many reasons why, particularly with an elastic or actually no time frame, that they could not deliver up documents that you've requested. The shortage of person power,
Yep.
Other people are asking for it, as well as sort of a blanket concept of, well, there's an investigation going, but presumably that doesn't track very well. There can be an investigation, but you're not asking them for confidential information about questioning that was done.
No.
You're
Yeah.
asking for the credit card information. Even if that's a subject of the investigation, I would think someone could argue, so what?
Yeah.
It's still, there was a credit card, there were purchases made, we don't know whether the purchases were legitimate or whether the credit card was legitimate, we want the records.
Right. If I had asked for the records months before the Wanda Greene investigation, they wouldn't have been able to withhold them. And the good thing about North Carolina public records law is that it's pretty clear on what you can exempt because of an ongoing criminal investigation. Financial records are not one of them. And so as we've gone through this, we've tried to write stories that at least are giving little snacks, right? Of here's what possibly might be part of the investigation, and here's why they're not giving us the records. And so we've often used, in many ways, it's a strategy to inform readers, but also to put the pressure on county officials and elected officials about not only are you not saying anything about this investigation that now we know had to do with taxpayer money, there also is this state law that you guys are, required to abide by. And as elected officials, what do you have to tell the people who are interested in this story and want to know this information that we believe we're entitled to know?
Okay. Well, let's talk again more specifically here. You've been covering Wanda Greene and all the permutations, topics ranging from salary increases that were not necessarily approved, misissuance perhaps of credit cards, misuse of credit cards, gift cards, the equestrian center, uses of public money, lack of oversight, so on and so forth. And now we have an indictment, and I've read through the indictment, I'm sure you have as well, and it seems to focus on some of those things. It names Wanda and Michael. Wanda's got the majority of the indictable offenses. Michael has his share. Michael, of course, is her son. It goes into a pretty specific detail about credit cards and gift cards and what those cards were used for, and attempts to potentially hide the purchases by getting other cards and so on and so forth. I just want to ask you sort of globally, were you surprised, or are you surprised at what not only what's in there, but what is not in there?
That's a good question. I think a lot of the things that we've reported on, I've gone back and forth and gone certainly controversial. Certainly, I can see the outrage by taxpayers, but is it illegal? I don't know about that, and I think in the few times that we've seen Wanda Greene's attorneys comment, it's kind of talked about these things that were done with commissioner approval. The retention incentives and the salary increases, though they may be hidden in ordinances and all that, and in the equestrian payments, she had the authority to make those expenditures. Now, I don't know how that falls under any federal law violations. I do know that they are still investigating, and so I wouldn't be surprised if there were additional charges that eventually come down. Now, whether they come and deal with some of the things we've reported on that aren't mentioned in the indictment, I don't know. It's telling to me that there's an ongoing investigation, even after an indictment has been handed up.
Well, of course, as we know, we have a federal example of investigations that are going on, and it's a long, grinding process. As formerly with myself and my background on both sides with the government outside, we know that investigations go on, and we've all witnessed it for a long time. Perhaps what we're seeing here, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, is the indictment has some of the so-called low-hanging fruit. I mean, if you use a card for a personal purchase to purchase a purse or lingerie or something like that at a local retail establishment, it's pretty clear that that's sort of out of bounds as to what you should be doing. If, on the other hand, you're using public funds to benefit in part a equestrian center, but there are tangible benefits presumably that Buncombe County might realize as a result of that, and if you had commissioners who were knowledgeable about what was going on, maybe they didn't agree with 100% of it, that becomes more difficult. Plus, as you mentioned, and I don't want to again put words in your mouth, there may be other illegalities here, but they may not be illegal under federal law, they may be state law. So I'm going to ask you, do you have any sense that there is any efforts being made in other quarters, state prosecutors or civil suits or anything along those lines?
I think you kind of hear two different arguments about that. You can say certainly some of this stuff can fall under state embezzlement charges, right? But I think it depends on the philosophy of the prosecutor, and whether they see that as a waste of resources if she's being tried at the federal level. I don't see any indication, for example, that Todd Williams is kind of conducting his own investigation. It was brought to his attention when the county first uncovered some questionable activity, and he referred it to the SBI and to the FBI, which is not an unusual move. And it's probably likely that if he were to ever press any charges or make that move, it's possible that another prosecutor would have to come in and do that.
Or it could be something akin to a special prosecutor
Right.
within the ambit of the state government.
Right.
It doesn't all, again, because the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office are looking for federal crimes.
Right.
And there has to be certain elements of it that make it a federal crime versus a state crime.
Right.
So what's your sort of big picture analysis of this? I think, again, it's not like you worked in New York or Los Angeles or Chicago or my own somewhat adopted hometown of Philadelphia, where big city corruption is not uncommon. So you don't necessarily have a lot to compare your experience being here in Asheville and dealing with Buncombe County with others. But it does, I do get a flavor in what you write of the sense of, okay, we have this person, she's the county manager, she has a contract. By the way, did you ever pick up a contract that actually was duly executed by Ms. Greene and also by some official?
An employment contract?
Yes.
Yeah. The employment contract exists, and it's not just Wanda's signature on it.
Was it forever, or was it for a term of years?
I can't remember. I do remember it had not been touched in quite a long time, which I've actually seen be typical with municipal managers who have been in their position for a long time. Although often you see maybe some pay raises and stuff, but it was not touched. I don't think hardly at all during her tenure. So.
But you don't recall a provision in there that said this contract is for a term of 5 years, subject to
No, I don't
renewal.
think they did that. You know, and because she's an at-will employee, if the commissioners wanted to get rid of her, they could have gotten rid of her, no problem. They didn't need a reason. So,
So, again, sort of big picture, you have this person, she obviously she's credited with doing a lot of good things for the area, growth, tourism, not all, because of what she's done, maintaining some degree of fiscal responsibility, notwithstanding some of these sort of off the book or on the book purchases for her own benefit. And given her long tenure, and apparently, again, from my eyes, but I'm more interested in your eyes, a sort of distance between the commissioner's exercise of authority. They could have done more. Maybe they didn't want to. Maybe they were too busy. Maybe they trusted her. Maybe they figured somebody else was doing it. But what's your sense of just how the county government was working under her leadership, and I say under her leadership, and how that culture contributed to the situation that we're now looking at?
I think Wanda Greene, from everything I've heard, had pretty sharp elbow tactics and was certainly the CEO of Buncombe County, running daily operations. I think now there's that conversation between how much oversight commissioners have and how much of that would be micromanaging. So they're kind of towing that fine line that you have as an elected board. But I think based on the authority that Wanda Greene had, the fact that there was no detailed line item budget for years made to commissioners before they voted, and the fact that Wanda Greene did not receive a regular evaluation, to me signals that the commissioners weren't exactly operating like Wanda's 7 bosses or 5 bosses, a few years ago. It seemed like the other way around. And I think the county right now is taking a good hard look at itself and its policies, and have made some changes, and I will give them the credit for that. But there's certainly probably some reflecting going on, and how to move forward. Like I've talked about, there's a lot of that sensational stuff about Wanda and what she bought and how she did it. But at the end of the day, there's a good chunk of money that amid tax increases and program cuts that have hit everyday people that are wondering, how could this happen?
Well, that's a question. We're going to get quickly to what's being done now. But is your sense that these gift cards and these multiple credit cards that are issued to a wide variety, that the commissioners weren't aware of that? I mean, weren't some of them even recipients of that? So, I mean, where does that come from? To me, again, it's the county government. All the money that the county gets is taxpayer money in one form or another. Who said they should go out and get gift cards? I mean, I've never heard of that degree of use or even misuse of funding. What was that about?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I would be hard-pressed to believe that commissioners knew that, over 10 years, Wanda either bought herself or directed people to buy, over $90,000 worth of gift cards. But, we've seen that in the indictment, that at least one commissioner has been tied to spending one of the improperly purchased gift cards. And so all the commissioners who served at the time say that they're not that commissioner in the indictment. So you either think the feds are lying, or you're wondering which one of them is lying. I think there's a ton of questions like that I think really understanding how things get approved and reviewed, and how the county never had a problem pop up in an audit. These are all questions.
Well, that's a question I wanted to ask you. I'm sorry to interrupt, but one of the other newspapers in town printed portions of the indictment and also some financial records. The records of iPhone purchases and DVDs of West Side Story and The Searchers and Reservoir Dogs. I mean, wasn't somebody supposed to be or actually looking at these in the auditor section of Buncombe County and saying, well, there's something here that doesn't seem to track, and here's the red flag and here's the alarm?
Yeah, I think those are the questions that remain. Is it true, as the county tries to kind of, they argue that a lot of this was management override, that, because she had the authority, she just went and did it. But, there's an internal audit function.
But that's not.
I know.
It's not an excuse.
Right.
It's
right.
It's what happened.
Right.
Because again, the thing that floors me, and I frankly think a lot of the citizens that are outraged about this, is, wait a second. She may have had a contract. It may have been legitimate. Maybe there wasn't a renewal clause in it, or that it had to be approved. Okay, so she's in office. The county commissioners are who we elected. We did not elect Wanda Greene. Derivatively, if we were unhappy with Wanda Greene, we could have voted out a particular commissioner. But where does that mentality, and again, you're closer to it than I, and obviously our listeners, how did people feel like that was a legitimate way of exercising their fiduciary responsibility to just, let that go?
Yeah, I know. That's a great question. And I really look forward to them answering that, because I think, they have kind of touted their own internal controls. They have, said that they had these things in place, and that's why these transactions were actually flagged. But the indictment shows that these, the spending spans at least a decade.
They weren't flagged. I mean, they.
Well, there was a questionable, and I don't know full details, but they've at least said that the reason the feds were involved was because the county saw questionable activity, and they're the ones who notified the proper authorities. So, and that's the argument that even the external auditors, who they've since changed the firm, have argued too, that because there are internal controls in place, so when something happened, they did it. But, you have to ask, common sense-wise, when you see receipts that are being redacted, when you see commissioners who have been on the board for a long time, some of whom voted for a budget that they didn't even see in full, you have to ask, did you really trust her that much? Is that what it is? You boiled it down to trust in the fact that she helped lead you guys to good bond ratings? Because obviously, as you can see now, that plenty of allegations and plenty of improper spending can happen despite that.
So are gift cards not allowed anymore under the new regime?
It's very strictly prohibited. They have modeled actually another county, which I believe had its own gift card purchasing scandal, and that's how they've addressed it. They have only certain departments can buy them, and if they want to buy them, they have to go through a process of making that request with a so-called gift card liaison who works in the finance department. So they've put some strict limits, months after this stuff has surfaced.
How about just getting rid of them? That sounds like a good idea. You want to give somebody a pat on the back, give them a Hallmark card, not a gift card. But I think it's also remarkable the number of people that actually had credit cards.
Yeah.
And I suspect that's been addressed. But again, I think this came out in the indictment, but it might have been in a story that you wrote. But Michael Greene, her son, was caught, in effect, of misusing a credit card that was issued to him. Misusing, I think, in the sense of using it to purchase a personal item. And yet, they took his card away from him. I don't know if they gave him another card, but he still stayed on the job. And to me, again, that raises a question. If that happened, wouldn't that have been something that you would think would come to the attention to the board, come to the attention of the county attorney, and there would have to be a investigation or evaluation and say, if this person did that, and this person, it's got obviously is a blood relative of the county manager, maybe this guy shouldn't be there at all, and yet he was.
Yeah. I think they've addressed their kind of nepotism policies, but yeah, the fact remains was that, Michael, when this was uncovered, the matter was referred to his mother. And I understand his mother is the highest ranking county official, but you would think that, not even in hindsight, you would think proactively there would be policies in place like that.
Well, don't they have those? Are there
now
not?
They do.
Do they have like an ethics policy? Does something have to be referred to an ethics committee anytime, there is something along those lines, whether it's nepotism or not?
I know the commissioners have their ethics policy. I'm not sure that there's one that is in place for county staff. Although, you know, the policy with county issued credit cards was that you cannot buy, you know, personal purchases. Gift cards were not strictly prohibited, but so there were things that were just plain old violated, and Wanda Greene, because she seemingly had gained so much trust from the commissioners and had this policy of being heavy-handed, where you separate the commissioners and you separate your staff, and from what I've been told, that was kind of a push by her. You know, that maybe that explains the lack of communication, but yeah, there's clear faults, I think, and I think that's justified when people are constantly asking, how did any of this happen?
Well, again, if the county is moving forward, and I had a brief conversation, I have not been able to get her on the air, Mandy Stone, about their transparency policy, and they're trying to, you know, move forward in the new regime, and, you know, things happen. But things happen, but there were multiple infractions over a long period of time, and my conclusion is because people didn't pay attention, didn't care. There was a culture of corruption, and I would, frankly, and again, this is my opinion, I'm not supposed to be that opinionated, I suspect, is I would expect there to have been house cleaning. And I don't know whether your reporting revealed that, but in addition to these steps forward that they're trying to take, was anybody else pushed out, let go, reprimanded?
No, you've actually seen Mandy Stone, who was a longtime county employee, was with them longer than Wanda was. She became county manager without even a search, and that was a choice by commissioners. You did see the departure of John Creighton, who was the assistant county manager, and he left, but he was not fired. And the county board also saw the departure of their own separate attorney. Yeah, there have not been that many personnel changes since Wanda Greene left.
So, obviously, with this being your beat, and with you being the most recent biographer, so to speak, of what's going on, you're still plugged in to this. What are you looking for, without necessarily divulging in advance your next story, but what are you looking for? What do you think? Because I think that if all that occurs here is, you know, it looks like Wanda Greene, at least at this point, is and Michael both are going to fight this. They haven't. There's no indication that they're looking at a plea deal, but you may have advance information.
Yeah,
on that.
you know, I wouldn't say that they're not guilty pleas are really indicative of anything. And you know, it's right after they've been indicted. I will say that federal indictments usually result in a conviction, over 90% of the time.
And she's hired a new lawyer, is that right?
She's hired Knowlton, who is a well-known defense attorney who's been in some high-profile cases, and that certainly would be an interest. That's an interesting move on her part. So, you know, we'll see what happens. Certainly, what's next in that case, and how the county cleans up its mess. Those are the big things that I'll be looking at.
So I guess what I'm asking you and pressing you further on is, if all that happens here is that ultimately there is a conviction of Wanda and Michael Greene, either through a plea deal or through some protracted legal process, a trial, I think your readers are going to not feel like that was good justice, and they look to you, because you've established a name for yourself as being somebody out there who would take a position. I don't know. You don't write editorials.
No, I don't. And I'm certain that our editorial board will have something to say about that. But I think you certainly press the county on what exactly it's going to do, and whether that's trying to recoup these costs. I don't know if that's even a possible option for them. But Wanda Greene, whatever the outcome will be, what remains is county government that will have to continue providing services and doing it without such controversy.
All right, well, too quickly out of time. I want to thank my guest today, Jennifer Bowman, a reporter with the Asheville Citizens-Times. We've been talking about what she does, her beat, Wanda Greene's story. I want to thank my producer, Shelley Lieberman from Focus Solutions, and we'll see you next time on the radio.